The Bible reading this morning talks at the very end of this passage in Matthew chapter 18, talks about the heart. Steve read for us, if you do not forgive your brother from your heart. And I just want to begin our lesson this morning with the idea of the heart. Today I want to talk about something that I've really never talked about. And it's something that I usually don't talk about. And I'm not real comfortable talking about necessarily. But I felt needful for us to understand, because the question was brought up to me by a friend of mine a while back about a Bible tithe. Now, I want us to understand, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk us through the idea of a Bible tithe. So if you will jump ahead in our Bibles to Matthew chapter 23. We'll get to this in a few weeks, about a month actually, in our Bible readings. But in Matthew chapter 23, Jesus is approached by some of the very religious Jewish people of his day, and he approaches them back. And in this dialogue between the scribes and the Pharisees, chapter 23 deals with 7 woes, or 7 failures of the scribes and the Pharisees. And in verse 23 of chapter 23, Jesus says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others. You blind guides, strain out a gnat and swallow a camel." I love that saying. To strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Well, which is bigger? If you have something, maybe it's camel's milk. And when you're milking, sometimes there's a bug that will get into the milk pail. And so we run our milk through a filter to strain out all the little particles of dirt or the gnats that might get in it. Okay? Bet you didn't know that when you go to the store and you buy a jug of milk. I'll bet you didn't know what all was in that milk. I grew up on a dairy farm. I can tell you what's been in that milk. And you would never drink milk again if I told you what was in that milk. However, the idea here is that they're focusing on something small. Jesus says that they tithe the garden herbs, mint, anise, and cumin, or dill, as the ESV says. And so they're very conscious about tithing these, but what they have done is forgotten more important matters. Now, Jesus does not say that you should focus on the big items, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. But rather, Jesus says that they should do all of the above. But their focus was on something that could be seen. Justice and faithfulness are not something others see. That's a different issue. That's an issue of the heart. But Jesus talks here about the tithe. And so I wanted to use this as an introduction to the Bible tithe. The Bible tithe, as we just read about it, the concept of the tithe, and by the way, before we get too far, I'll mention it later, but before we get too far, a tithe is 1/10. Okay? And a tithe comes from the Hebrew word tenth. And it goes clear back to the book of Genesis chapter 14. If you'll go back there for a moment, Abraham in the book of Genesis, before he's even called Abraham, comes kind of up with the idea of a tithe. So to give you the background, Abraham's nephew Lot has been taken captive, and Abraham goes in hot pursuit. He's going to return all of the captives that were taken captive, and he's successful. And when he comes back, he expresses his gratitude to God, and he offers a priest of the Most High God a tithe. So let's look at this. And again, that simply means 1/10. So if we read Genesis chapter 14, verse 17, after his return from the defeat of Chedorlaomer, or however that word is pronounced, Abraham's defeat of this king, and the kings who were with him, and the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shiva, that is the king's valley. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was a priest to the Most High God, or the God Most High, I'm sorry. And he blessed him, being he blessed Abraham. So Melchizedek comes out. The king of Sodom comes out as well. But the king of Sodom is kind of glanced over. He was a pagan king. We all know the story about Sodom and Gomorrah, what happened to them later on. But right now, the focus is on Melchizedek, the king of Salem. And he blessed him and said, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, professor of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." And Abram gave 1/10 of everything, and the king of Sodom said to Abraham, "Give me the persons," etc., etc. But we see there in that passage that Abraham gave 1/10 of everything that he had to Melchizedek. And I would assume that in giving it to Melchizedek, Abraham is expressing his gratitude to God. Now, this is referenced again in the book of Hebrews, chapter 7. If we'll go back there very quickly, Hebrews chapter 7 and verse 4. It says, let's begin in verse 1. For this let's just do verse 4. See how great this man was, to whom Abraham, the patriarch, gave 1/10 of the spoils. So what Abraham captured, took back from the king who had taken it from Sodom, taken it with his nephew and his family. Abraham captured, took it back, committed 1/10 of that to Melchizedek for the use of the Lord. Now I want us to notice a few points about the passage. No place does it say or even indicate that Abraham, who of course, or Abram as he's called there, was required or obligated in any way to pay this tithe to Melchizedek. This was something that Abraham did of his own free will, his own volition, in order to express his gratitude to God. So when someone does something really nice for you, don't you feel a debt of gratitude to that person? Yeah. Okay. So an example is that Dennis has brought up several times the number of people who showed up to help him move. And he's grateful for that. Okay? And so here Abraham is expressing his gratitude to God by giving to God's servant Melchizedek 1/10 of everything that he has gained from this victory. And Abraham is simply doing that, expressing his gratitude to God for the victory. There's no law, no ordinance that says that he had to or was required to do